So first news of the day, I'm going to be delivering this presentation in English, even though I am French, right? So that's the first thing that makes me think, am I really the right person here? Should I really be doing this? So that's going to be a common thread for the whole thing. The second thing that makes me ask myself if I'm the right person is that I'm not really a developer myself. First thing to note. My specialty is SEO, search engine optimization. So I've been working at Google for the last 6.5 years in Dublin. My job is, if you will, sort of a mix of a developer advocate at Google and project manager, if you will. So I try to facilitate communication between Google and webmasters, website owners, website creators. On one side, so I make communication happen both ways. I take messages from the search teams and I distribute them on different channels to whoever wants to listen to me, so you today, for example. And I also listen to questions, listen to feedback, and prioritize it, put it in form, and take it to the engineering teams that then do what they can with it to make our products better. So that's part of my job. And the other part of my job is to try to make communications better in general in terms of the emails we send, the resources that are available, our help center documentation, and all of these things. I am today in Nantes, but for the past 8 days, 9 days, I've been on the road. I've been doing a little bit of a Tour de France, except in Bordeaux, which was a colleague of mine, Rick Viscomi, that talked about website speed. And then I was in Montpellier and Nancy last week, and then in Lille, Caen, Angers, and today Nantes this week to talk about SEO. The small difference being that today I'm talking development, pure development, JavaScript, and I'm talking to you instead of professionals of SEO per se. So I'm testing out this presentation. Let's hope it works. It's retaking some information that was shared already. It's sharing a little bit more insights on what to do, what not to do. So I hope that it will be interesting for everyone. We will basically, I'm planning, we have 50 minutes together. I'm planning on about 40 minutes, maybe even a bit less. As this is the first time I do this presentation, I'm not sure exactly how long it will last. So we will then have time for questions and answers. At the end, I'll be very happy to take them. And we'll handle this at that time. So just a note, so as said before, I'm not a JavaScript developer myself. I know some aspects of JavaScript development. But this will not be an in-depth session about how to specifically integrate an Angular feature or how Polymer actually works in this specific situation, etc. This is a framework-agnostic presentation, and we won't dive too much into the details, technical details. It's basically aimed at explaining the general threads of what is happening with indexing, crawling and indexing JavaScript pages. If we take, however, a JavaScript app, for example, this here, very simple, content is loaded, you have an image, you have links, you have content. This is more or less what it looks like in the code, right? So you have the shell of the HTML site that is actually presented there. You have the JavaScript files, and if you look closely in the app root there, you have basically zero. You have nothing. In the initial JavaScript, in the initial HTML that is presented to the client, before JavaScript is executed, you don't have content. Is that a problem for SEO? As I'm pretty sure most of you know, yes, it is a problem. It can be then very hard for Googlebot and other search engines to understand what's happening exactly on the content of this page. So there are solutions, hopefully, which is why I'm here today. So let's first take a step back and go into Search 101. Let's explore really how search engines find documents and put them in an index. When we talk about documents, we're talking about a massive amount. Google has seen up to date north of 130 trillion documents on the web. So that's only the documents Google has seen, and that's data from over 2 years ago already. Today, I don't even want to imagine where we are. The web grows exponentially. So this is a massive amount of documents to actually look at. Google search engine and other search engines work somewhat similarly to the index of a book or the index of a public library, right? So you have an insane amount of information, and then you need an index to know where what information is and how to get to it, right? So the public library index will actually tell you information on such and such person is findable in aisle C, row 20, whatever actually the information is. So the Google index will work somewhat in a similar fashion. There are two steps, crawling and indexing. You will need to first discover the documents, which is the crawling step, finding them on the web, and then the indexing step, which is to choose which ones to potentially serve to users, which ones to ignore, etc. Very much like, again, the index of a book or of a public library. So let's look at crawling first. Crawling is the first step. It happens at the very beginning when Google discovers a document. Documents should be associated with reachable URLs. Very important to note. Different documents can have similar content. Duplicate content can exist on the web. There are ways to handle this. And you need a clean, unique URL when you are looking at content. Where is the content hosted? You need it to match to one specific clean URL. So when we talk about reachable URL, when Google arrives on a website, it will first look at a simple text file, the robots.txt file. That file is hosted directly at the root of a host, right? So you will have example.com/robots.txt. This document will indicate to crawlers, to Google crawlers, but really any crawler that exists, what not to crawl and what to crawl. So you will be able to help search engines, actually direct search engines to parts of your website where you have content that you wish to be indexed and shown to users. You can also disallow, make sure that some parts are private. If the private parts shouldn't be on the index, there's no point in Google and other search engines crawling it, right? So you can indicate that. You can also, in the robots.txt, indicate the address of a sitemap file. The sitemap file being an indication to the search engines of what other documents, what are the documents on the host that exist and that search engines should be aware of. So that sitemap, usually XML file, will have a list of the documents that you wish to show search engines. This is one way that Google and other search engines actually explore the web. They find a page, a document that is on a host, automatically go back to the robots.txt, and through there discover all of the other ways that, all of the other documents that exist on this website. There is the issue of canonical documents. So you can have different URLs that have the same content, right? So you have the same content maybe for mobile and for desktop. You have the same content, almost exactly the same content. It would confuse users or search engines if both were indexed. So there is a way for a website creator to actually indicate that this content is duplicate, and therefore it's probably not that interesting for search engines to crawl the duplicate document again and again and again. And in the code of such a duplicate document, this is the canonical tag here that manages this. This helps search engines and Google crawl properly your website by oftentimes crawling less often the duplicate documents. Now, we've said that there is supposed to be a simple URL, a single URL that relates to a document and therefore to the content that is on that document. Traditionally, when the web was born, that was traditional URL, example.com/page/traditional URL, whatever it is. One piece of HTML corresponding to one URL. That was very easy for then crawlers to interpret. The crawler would arrive on the website, on the page, would look at the HTML, see the content associated with the URL, done, bam, the document is crawled. Nowadays, even before nowadays, you have the beautiful technology of Ajax that was created, right? So with Ajax, you can dynamically change the content without changing the URL and get new content loaded from the server that way. Now that's a little bit of a problem for the crawler because it can't access the new content that is loaded because there is no new URL. So there was a little invention that came up to counter this, which was the hash bang, right? Or the escaped fragment. So it was a way of indicating to crawlers, to the browser, to everyone, that this is different content and should be treated as such by search engines, for example. Nowadays, there are new best practices that are in place, most notably the History API. So the History API is a way to, using JavaScript, manage the navigation in the browser, previous, next, etc., and making search engines and other solutions understand that this is new content that corresponds to a new area of the website. And by the way, the hash banks are not really recommended anymore for Ajax. So History API is available. We'll come back to it a little bit later. Right, so that's crawling. That was easy, right? No one says anything. Did I teach anything to anyone here, or is that understood completely by everyone? We're not sure. All right, so we're going to go into indexing. So, right, once a document has been crawled, then Google needs to decide if it's going to put it in its index, right? And what exactly will go in the index. So first is the actual core content and the embedded content on the document. This is essential, central to the search engine, because when we show a document to a user that enters a request in the search engine, we want to present them with content that answers exactly their queries. Therefore, we need to understand what content is on that page. Of note, we're also interested in embedded content. So take, for example, discuss comments. Those are not exactly loaded in the original HTML, right? The initial HTML of a page, because it's content that is living on another platform somewhere and that is loaded dynamically once the user is on the page. So this is also important to potentially interpret and index for Google at that stage. HTTP codes are essential. Google wants to serve pages that are live, accessible to users. If you're returning a 400 error for XX, you're going to have problems, because then Google might interpret that this page, well, doesn't exist anymore, which is exactly what you're indicating with your server response, and then drop the page from the index. So HTTP codes matter. Thirdly, links. Once a document has been crawled, Google has found it and indexed. It's somewhere in the index. It's been put there, available for service to users that request something to Google. The way that Google works is that it will try to find the links on the page to follow and then to crawl the documents that are linked then, right? This is part of the original technology that was the PhD subject topic of the founders of Google, right? Following the links and attributing some importance to them in terms of ranking. A crawler will need to follow links. So here, very important thing, links, all links don't really work. Links will need to have, the most important thing is href attributes. So it will work with an A tag, right? With a span, you will have a problem. This will not be crawled by Google. Same thing with an on-click inside of an A tag. That's not enough. And then you can combine both. That will actually work. This link will be crawled by Google. So very important to keep that in mind. So that's it, crawling, indexing. We crawl the web, we discover the documents. Once we've discovered them, we index them, we choose which ones to index, and then we revert back with the links to other documents which we crawl and index, crawl and index. Mission accomplished. Thank you very much. See you next time. All right. Of course, that's not how it happens in the real world, because of JavaScript-powered websites. Another step is actually inserted in here, in between the crawling and the indexing. And we're talking about rendering, right? So rendering, we're going to make a little distinction here, which is that I'm talking about the rendering of the HTML. I'm not talking really about the rendering of the pixels or the DOM generation or anything. I'm talking about the HTML that is sent to the browser for the user to then consume. So this could be server-side or client-side, right? And this is what we're going to be focusing on. So meet Googlebot. Googlebot is actually the system that manages the crawling and indexing of Google. Originally, you're talking about one computer that just has a program that follows link to link and tries to find the web. Today, of course, the web being the size that we mentioned before, we're talking about a very complex system that has millions of machines connected together and that does constant data churning, data crunching, and that therefore needs to be optimized. We don't crawl anything we can. We don't index everything we can. We try to select and we try to be smart about it. That means that we will treat crawling, rendering, and indexing in a certain way. Ideally, in the perfect world, this is what would happen. You would have a crawl, a render, the HTML and JavaScript are interpreted, Google understands exactly what's on it, then sends to index, and then follows the links to other documents, and it starts again. In an ideal world, this is instant, right? This happens exactly as Googlebot arrives. However, even considering the technical strength of the Googlebot system and of the crawling and indexing at Google, this is not possible, in part due to JavaScript-powered websites. This is just too many resources, and it would come in the way of proper coverage of the whole web. So here is what actually happens. The rendering of JavaScript-powered websites is actually deferred until enough resources are available for Googlebot to process the content and to interpret it and to render it properly. So instead of what we had, which was what would be ideal, the automatic instant loop of crawling, rendering, indexing, we have another system. What happens really is that you have an instant first wave of indexing. So this one is instant. It's a crawl of the document. We look at it, we look at the content, we index the document or not, we make the decision, we find the new links, we go crawl them, and that actually happens automatically there. And then there is a second wave, which is the one we're talking about today. When the rendering resources become available for Google, then there is actually a full render of the page, of the HTML and JavaScript combination, and that second wave of indexing happens. The content that is generated in that renderer is actually indexed this time. So when you have potentially a JavaScript-powered page, it might be indexed quickly with the instant wave, but then just the existence of that page is indexed, and whatever is interpreted and rendered in the initial HTML you send. If you want the full content, then you have to wait a little bit, which is slightly annoying, because here I'm saying as rendering resources become available, that might not be just a few hours later. It might be much longer. So in order to counter this, enter dynamic rendering. So just so that I get a little bit of information, who here knows already about dynamic rendering? Okay, I see 2 or 3 hands, which makes me think that actually they were right to send me, right? Let's see how that works. So in dynamic rendering, you're going to have a call from the browser to the server when the user, when the internet user navigates to a URL on your website, calls your server responds, sends it the initial HTML, the sort of shell that we saw at the very beginning of the presentation, plus the JavaScript, and then the rendering happens in the browser, client side, as always, no problem. Now, the crawler, Google crawler, when the crawler does a call to your server, what will happen is that before sending back information to the crawler, you will send that initial HTML and JavaScript to a renderer. And that renderer will do the job of actually executing everything, rendering it, and sending static HTML that you actually then put in place in the renderer to the crawler. What you're doing there is that at that initial step of indexing, you're already sending back HTML documents to the crawler that has your content. The app root is not empty anymore if you're using Angular, right? This is the way that has been found to help index the content of JavaScript-powered websites. There is documentation online that you can find. It's been released about 2 weeks ago, I believe, within that sort of time frame. If you type get started with dynamic rendering, you will find the documentation in Google that will help you understand how to put it in place. Briefly speaking, there are dynamic rendering tools that exist. Those are only examples. You might have heard of others, mostly Puppeteer, which is really hosted on Google Direct documentation. Rendertron, you might have heard of prerender.io. This sort of things are used then to pre-render that content and create that static HTML that contains your content, the content of your page. Right, so that being said, there's going to be problems. It's not going to be working perfectly, right? That would be too easy. So let's go through a few of the problems that we have seen happening for websites that are fully rendered using JavaScript. These are not the only problems that can happen, but probably the most common ones. So you remember that URL slide before. This is really important, really keeping in mind that you need to generate URLs when you create JavaScript websites. The history API is the way to go, probably in many cases. The history API is actually ready for most browsers. It is the technology that we really recommend these days. So think about this first and foremost whenever you're working on a JavaScript-powered website. Soft 404s. We said earlier that HTTP responses are important for Google, right? A soft 404 is when you return an empty page to the user, right? They see something like this. Oops, sorry, we don't have content, etc. But your server still serves a 200 response. For search engines, that's a problem. Because if we see a 200 response, we think that basically the content is there, and this is exactly this oops, this page doesn't exist content. We think that is exactly what you want to serve users. So you're going to have to be looking at your server responses here when the content is not there. So if the content is gone, use a 404 or a 410 answer. If the content has moved, use a 301 or a 302, depending on if it's permanent or temporary redirect, right? And if the content is actually there, a 200x 200 is actually necessary. You need to indicate to crawlers what to do. If Googlebot arrives to a page, a document that it has tried to access, let's say, for example, every week, because it's found that the document changes once in a while, etc., and then one week it sees a response, a 404 response. Okay, might be an error. The website might be broken somehow, so the URL that I followed might be weird for some reason. So it just goes away, doesn't do anything. Then the week after that still comes, same thing. Okay, that's weird. After a while, Googlebot will realize, okay, the last X attempts I did, the content was not available. The server tells me there's no content there. I'm going to drop it. The page is then dropped from the index of Google, and then the Googlebot should not come back to it in the future. So it's also important for you to use this to manage your crawl budget, to not overload your server for no reason. Sneaky 404s. That can be a bit of a problem. So let's see what happens when you're browsing using client-side rendered content. Your browser sends a request to the slash page, the home page, to your server, right? So your server will send back the HTML in JavaScript to the browser. The JavaScript is read server-side, client-side, sorry, and is interpreted, and therefore everything is hosted on there. The history API, the single page out routing, service workers, whatever you are using, if you're doing a PWA, right? Everything will actually happen client-side. Then your users navigates on your site. It leaves the home page and it goes to the about page. The request, this time in the browser, is not necessarily done to the server. It's done to the JavaScript file, which will generate client-side the content and send it to the browser. And therefore, what happens if the about request goes directly to the server can be problematic. It can return a 404 if you don't configure things properly. This is exactly what it will look like, right? So you will have the website, the page loads, you navigate, you go to another page, you have the page here. However, if you request directly the server, you will get a response, an error response. So make sure that you configure your sites to actually manage also direct traffic to the different documents, and not only within the app. Right. Handle all routes, basically, to your content on the server. Use actual links. We talked about this earlier. href links are more important, and you can combine them with onClick. Accidental no index. So no index tags are an HTML tag that you can include in the header of the document to indicate to search engines that this document in particular, you do not want it to be indexed. You do not want users to be able to find it online in search engines. It's not made for that. So when a search engine arrives on a document and sees a no index tag, it will actually not index that document. It's as simple as that. What we've seen in some cases is that JavaScript was used to actually remove the tag. But the tag was actually there, present in the header. So if you are using no index tags, make sure that you manage them properly in the header of the HTML rather than using any sort of interpretation through JavaScript. Right. So that brings us to debugging. There are tools that Google put in place, and you should be aware of them to help you understand SEO problems and, in general, interpretation problems, rendering problems for your websites. So currently, a lot of it lives under what is our mobile-friendly testing tool. This is one of the advanced tools that we have that helps to give information on a particular document, a particular URL. And there are plans to move things around in the future. We don't have anything to announce yet, but currently it lives there, right? So how is your page rendered? This document will give you information. If you look at this here, you will have view screenshot. It will show you, is everything interpreted properly? Is the rendering happening well? Which is very useful, obviously, to understand how Google actually sees the rendering. This is what Google sees, by the way. This is not what is seen in a browser by a visitor to your site. On top of that, it will tell you if there are mobile issues, which is always useful. It has a JavaScript console logs. So here, when you enter a JavaScript-powered document, it will tell you what, if any, difficulties Google is having to render the page and the content. So this is very useful because it might point specifically to a JavaScript web document, or some images don't work, or anything that interferes really with a proper rendering of your content. So this is in the mobile-friendly testing tool somehow. It will also enable you to check your markup. You can mark up content on websites using a whole host of solutions. One that is often used in the SEO world is schema.org tagging markup, which enables you to tell search engines, this page specifically, this content, it's a product, or it's a review, or it's a recipe, like a food recipe, right? So this tool will tell you exactly where, if you have problems in how you put together the information. Other set of tools. The Search Console. Can I get a raised hand? Who knows about Search Console? Okay, a few more. And who, okay, I guess if you know Search Console, you probably have it installed. So Search Console is the set of tools that Google put together to help web developers and website owners to understand how Googlebot, all of the crawling, indexing, ranking system of Google, understands a website. How much we show the website in search engine results. What kind of errors are we seeing? Is a page indexed? And if yes, for how long? If not, what is the problem? Is it actually not a problem because you actually put a 301 from document A to document B? So it means that document A probably should not be indexed because it's redirecting permanently to a document B. Well, this tool will let you make sure of that, right? This tool originally came from being just the sitemaps manager. So if you remember, the sitemap, XML sitemap, is the document that enables you to list all of the URLs that exist on your website and that you want search engines to visit. So this was the origin about 15 years ago now. And then on top of that, a lot of documents, a lot of reports, were added. A lot of different errors were surfaced, and it became a little bit, let's say, antiquated, right? So there's a new version of that tool that is out, and that includes much more information than previously about which documents are indexed, which ones have problems in the index, in crawling even, are there errors, what are they, etc. So I strongly encourage you to, as soon as you have a website out there, create a Search Console account for this property. We call that a property, a website. This is very easily done if you already have analytics on a property, Google Analytics. You will automatically be verified into Search Console. If you include a single verification tag in the header of the document, it will, of the roots of the document, you will, of the website, you will be verified into Search Console, etc. It's very easy. So I really recommend that. It will tell you if there are issues or penalties. Unfortunately, in the world of SEO, there can be penalties for over-optimization. Your website can be hacked. So this is the center of the messaging that Google uses for everything that is related to some sort of problem, serious problem, penalization being one example. Search Analytics will tell you, give you information on how many times, how many impressions your site got in the search engine results over a set period of time, how many clicks, what was the average position, etc. So you'll be able to optimize, basically identify which pages of your site are properly indexed and actually getting surfaced to real-life users, and which ones are not. It might also indirectly point you to rendering problems. If a page doesn't perform at all, it might be because there's a problem with it. So it could be another way to identify an issue. You also have this URL inspection and a live test that is in there. So you just enter a URL of your website, and it will tell you everything it knows about that URL. Is it mobile friendly? Is it indexed? Has it been crawled ever? Or hasn't been never seen by Google? It will tell you, do you have markup on there? All the information that Google knows about a document. So once again, really recommended looking into this. So that's pretty much it from me. This is, as I was saying, very high level into how a website that is powered by JavaScript, any sort of framework, not specifically Google frameworks, interacts with search engines. You always stand on the shoulders of giants. These people have been talking also about these sort of issues for the past while. You have Tom Greenaway in Australia that works on the Chrome side, John Mueller in Zurich from Google, all of them works on the general SEO trend. And Martin Splitt, Geekonaut here on Twitter, is really specialized on these JavaScript-powered websites in search. So I would recommend that you follow those if you want to get information in general about these talk tracks. And that was it for me. This time it's really mission accomplished. I'm 5 minutes faster than I wanted, but that leaves more time for questions. So please throw them at me. And remember that if you ask me how to implement a specific feature in Vue.js, I probably won't know the answer. But if it's related to search engines, to the Google search engine, I can probably help you.